I will be talking about self-archiving, which is the first step towards open access to information. So, what exactly self-archiving means? Self-archiving is the act of an author depositing a free copy of an electronic document online in order to provide open access to it. That means, if an author deposits his publication or even a picture or anything in a digital format to an institutional or any digital repository, it is called self-archiving. So, there are many ways of self-archiving. The best is of course the green road to open access. The self-archiving is also called green open access, and it refers to authors archiving their article in an institutional repository or a subject repository, because digital repositories can be divided into institutional repositories and subject. In case of institutional repositories, it is the publications of an institution, whereas in case of subject repositories, it is beyond the institute, but the scope is that of a subject. For example, our DRTC's librarians digital library is a subject repository where not only DRTC faculty or students, anybody can submit to that repository. Anyhow, coming back to green open access journals, they allow authors self-archiving their publications to institutional repositories. So, we have green road to open access, which means the authors publish or self-archive, and the journal we call a green open access journal if it allows open access. So, the author or author's institution or research project funding agency pay a fee to the publisher at publication time to make the publication available free at the point of access, which is the gold route. Actually, gold route is not really gold in the sense that the author or the funding agency pays for it. Sometimes I know in the case of European projects, the proposed organizations, in addition to the other costs, they put publication cost and pay to the publisher to make their publication open access even in a subscription based journal. This is called gold road to open access. Now, there are degrees of openness. Full and open access journals, of course, they are the wonderful ones. Then hybrid journals, where only some of the content is open, as in the case in a subscription based journal. Probably if an author pays a huge amount, only one particular article in that journal or the issue of a journal will be made open access. Then delayed open access, where the content is made open after a delay. So, some journals they say after a kind of an embargo period, okay, the authors can freely distribute or deposit in their institutional repositories, though it was already published in their journal. Normally, this is the case with thesis and dissertations, but in case of journals also, some journals allow after an embargo period. Now, treading the open path, when authors prefer to self-archive their past publications, they should be careful whether the publisher where the article is published would allow to do so. Just as in the case of green open access journals, yes, author is allowed to deposit his publication in their own institution's repository or their organization repository, and some allow after an embargo period, some do not allow. Okay. Authors should also decide in which journal they should publish. That means, if the author feels uncomfortable, no, this journal has too many restrictions in depositing the article in any open access journal, he should know before publishing in a particular journal how much freedom he has with regard to the article. So, the Sherpa site exactly addresses these issues. Okay. Sherpa has an expansion saying that securing a hybrid environment for research, preservation and access. Sherpa is a project started sometime in 2002, supported by JISC, a British based organization, a consortium of university and research laboratories. About 26 institutions are part of it, and it is led by British Library of University of Nottingham. So this is the Sherpa site. One of the interesting features, it has many features. It has many services, like it has Romeo service, where publishers' copyright laws and archiving policies are enumerated, so that if you go to Romeo site, you can decide whether a particular publisher, how much open access he would allow. Then you have Juliet, which is research funders archiving mandates and guidelines. That means some of the funding agencies, like whether it is the Department of Science and Technology of the Government of India, or European Commission, which also funds projects, or NSF. So there are many funding agencies which fund research. Then they have some policies, just as in the case of European Commission. The policy is any project receives funding from European Commission, the publications out of that project should be made available in open access repositories or journals. Then you have another, Sherpa is a tool to help researchers check if the journal in which the author wishes to publish the results will comply with funding agencies' requirements. Then Sherpa has a few services. The Open Door, a worldwide directory of open access repositories. Then you have Sherpa Search, which is a simple full text search of UK repositories. Then let us go a little more in detail about the site Romeo, which expands to rights metadata and open archiving. So Romeo is funded by JISC, which is a Joint Information Systems Committee, and JISC has under the Romeo project did a lot of investigations into the rights issues surrounding the self-archiving of research in the UK and academic community. They did, of course, a lot of surveys, survey of publishers, survey of authors, survey of users, and their opinions. They keep periodically publishing them. The main aim was to conduct these surveys and publish the reports, how giveaway literature is used and should be produced, so that it serves as a guideline or encouragement to the open access movement. So Romeo writes metadata recommendation. You have there are about 6 studies thus far, and there is a lot of advocacy material which is used for campaigning for open access. Then of course they have the directory of publishers archiving policies. This is exactly the Romeo site looks like. Then you have lot of color codes with regard to the publishing, and different form of green, gold roads to publishing. Green, of course, as we have already explained, can archive preprint and postprint. If a journal has a blue, this one, color code, they can archive postprint, that is the final draft, post refereeing. Then they have yellow, can archive preprints, that is pre-refereeing. Then white, archiving not formally supported. So white journals are really unwelcome, and green are the most welcome. So here, of course, you can see some of the journals in what color codes they are in, and of course you can visualize here the big list of journals, and it has columns, authors, preprints, if there is a green tick mark, that is allowed, then authors postprint, then you have other columns reporting each one of them. Then mandated OA. Research funders are now making it a condition of grant that a duplicate of any research paper be placed on a repository for open access. This what we have already talked about, because some of the funding agencies insist that the publications should be openly available. Then we have another service called Juliet under Sherpa. that is called Juliet covers research funders' open access policies. Increasingly, funding organizations are demanding project related publications should be in open access. Some funders provide funding to publish at least in hybrid journals where some content is in open. Authors should check Juliet list to see if a particular funder has open access requirement. Then some of the key symbols which appear in the next slides are given here. That is, if you look at open access archiving, that is ideal publication archiving policy has three key parts. That is whether to archive, deposit required to be made available free of charge without any access restrictions. Then what to archive, the full final version, the published version of the author's final peer reviewed version. Then when to archive, when accepted for publication, although toleration of publishers' embargoes negates this. Of course, we know that some of the publishers they have embargo period, but in any case this indicates whether there is an embargo period or not. So, and open access publishing, that is open access publishing is required, that is the funding agency insists on this. Then data archiving policies, Juliet assigns up to 2 open access ticks for data archiving policy. Data archiving is required, data must be deposited within 5 years. So, here you can see the columns under it. So, if there are 3 ticks under one column, how many of them are allowed, and of course, the next column only requires whether it is allowed or not, and the third column archiving policy is there. So, 2 ticks are possible there. So, Directory of Open Access Repositories is another service provided by Sherpa site. Serves as a registry of OA based institution and subject repositories. Then it gives the OAI base URL which helps in building data services, for service providers like metadata aggregators. Then Directory of Open Access Repositories, in addition to search repositories, can be browsed by subject, by country. That is one of the advantages of this particular DOAR is you can, if you want to start a service provider service, for example, we have one called Search Digital Libraries, which collects metadata from all repositories that are dealing with library and information science. So, I go to OpenDoor and see what are the repositories in LIS field and collect the base URLs and harvest them. So is the case if any library wants to provide a service in physics, chemistry or anthropology, they can go under the subject, browse under the subject, collect the repository base URLs and provide the aggregator service. By country, if somebody wants to start a service for all the repositories in India, they can go by country or by language. Then it lists the software also, whether the repository uses ePrints or DSpace or Fedora Commons or something like that. Then content type also, what content, whether they are books or articles or data sets. Then repository type, whether it is an aggregator service or an institutional repository or a government repository. Okay. So, you can see this is one snapshot from DOAR where some 2 repositories are listed with various labels. So, this is the Sherpa search where you can search for the UK repositories. Then in conclusion, Sherpa site is an excellent source of information about publishers and funding agency policies. Authors are cautioned to upload their publications only after going through the Sherpa site, because this is one of the biggest questions, especially for library people. When they want to start an institutional repositories, normally the approach is they collect the list of publications their faculty or scientists. Then before archiving their publications or encouraging the authors to put their publications in the repository, the librarians and the scientists or the faculty should consult Sherpa site to see whether they are allowed to archive their publications in the institutional repositories, or without that they may run into the risk of violating the copyright laws. That way Sherpa site is a big tool for the librarians and authors who advocate for open access to information. With that I conclude.